Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
When it rains on someone's wedding day, they tell the bride that it's a sign of a long and happy marriage. I don't know how much brides actually believe this, but perhaps it provides some solace when the weather on their so important day isn't exactly what they had hoped for. Likewise, people tell introverts that they have an edge when it comes to public speaking. Maybe this is to bolster their confidence, and maybe there's some truth to it. But in my case anyway, as a proud, card-carrying introvert, I've found a great deal of comfort, if not relief, in this adage. If you're an introvert, stay tuned because today's guest, Matthew Pollard, is going to share how you can outspeak, outsell, and outnetwork anyone. And if you happen to be an extrovert, don't turn this episode off. There are plenty of ideas that you can use too. Now, here's a little bit about Matthew. Forbes calls him the real deal. Global gurus list him as a top 30 sales professional. Top Sales World magazine named him a top 50 speaker, and Big Speak lists him as an international top 10 sales trainer. He's also the best-selling author of The Introverts Edge, which hit Amazon charts as the 8th most sold book of the week, appears on HubSpot's list of the most highly rated sales book of all time, and was selected by Book Authority as the number 2 best introvert book of all time. His new book, The Introvert's Edge to Networking, has already received endorsements from Harvard, Princeton, Neil Patel, Michael Gerber, Marshall Goldsmith, and Dr. Ivan Misner, who was one of my first interviews on this podcast. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Man, I'm ecstatic to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
You know, as an introvert, I've really been looking forward to chatting with you. So I'm glad you could take time and get together with me and my audience.
You know, it's my absolute pleasure. I think we were just talking offline about how important it is to me that people admit to being an introvert. Because, I mean, you're running a podcast, you're a speaker coach. You know, I talk about sales and networking, and introverts think that they can't do any of these things. Yet some of the best people in the world, actually the best people in the world, tend to be introverts. So I really love talking about this topic and helping people confront the reality that the introverts listening, by the way, you're not second-class citizens. Your path to success is just different.
That's great to know. You know, your first book called The Introvert's Edge was a tremendous success. It's got a lot of momentum. What motivated you to write it? And why do you think it was so well received?
You know, I think the reason why it was so well received was because there actually isn't a book in existence on introverted selling. And, you know, it's funny, my publisher, when we were first having the conversation, they're like, oh, no, your book speaks to a general audience because it could really help anyone. And I said, yeah, but there's enough books written for extroverts, or even there are a lot of books written by introverts that are still perceived as written for extroverts. So I want to have a book that's purely for us introverts, to help us realize that there's a system and a process that's not full of bulldog techniques and hard closing, but it's just a natural step-by-step process to selling. And so it was really me understanding marketing and saying, well, firstly, I'm really passionate about this. And secondly, there has to be one. Like, why would I want to compete with all the thousands of other books that are out there? But really, the reason I wrote it, and by the way, I didn't want to write it. I did not want to write this book. And I know a lot of authors probably never say that. But for me, I mean, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. And, you know, spelling and reading for me, horrible, you know, really, really tough. You know, the reason I know so much about business is because I consumed audiobooks and listened to YouTube videos, not because I read books. So writing a book for me was horrible. It was a horrible idea for me to do for myself. But what I realized was my backstory is that I was a really introverted kid, reading speed of a 6th grader, horrible acne, fell into sales after losing my job just before Christmas. And the only jobs you can get in Australia, I mean, it's summer and Christmas break at the same time, was commission-only sales roles, which was terrifying to me. And after 5 days product training and not a single second of sales training, I get thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia. Over $1,000 on each side, no idea how to sell, told to just go do it. And literally, I was rejected. I was told to get a real job. I was sworn at, but getting told to get a real job was always my favorite, right? It's the only job I could get. And door after door, this just happened until I got to my 93rd door where I made my first sale. And I remember making about $70, and I was ecstatic for about 45 seconds until I had my next horrible realization for the day. I got to do this again tomorrow and the next and the next. And anyway, the story goes that literally I taught myself how to sell watching YouTube videos and became the number one person in the company in about 6 weeks. Fast forward a year, I'd been promoted 7 times. Fast forward just shy of a decade later, I'd been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. And what I realized is that there were 3 real key steps to what I call rapid growth, which is how to differentiate, how to niche market, and then how to create a sales system. So I started speaking about this. But before I spoke about sales systemization, I'd talk about my personal story. And I'd get so many introverts come up afterwards and say, Matt, your content was great, but I just had no idea I could sell as an introvert. So me not wanting to write the book, I kept telling other people to write it. And everyone said, Matt, no one's going to buy a book on introverted selling. No one's going to buy one. And I'm like, how does this make any sense? Like, there's this category that no one's filling. People have got to want it. There's got to be other people like me that really didn't think it was possible, but decided there was no other option than for sales to be a system. So the backstory was I worked with a ghostwriter. He was a client of mine. I took him from making no money. I mean, he made $27,000 in 2013, $12,000 when we reached out by 2014 in October. And literally by the end of the year, he made $120,000. The following year, he made just shy of $300,000. And literally he was like, Matt, you've got to put this content into a book. And I said, you know what? I keep trying to get other people to write it. No one will. You're a ghostwriter. You believe in my work. Yes, let's do it. And, fast forward, it was 2 years later, it's sold over 42,000 copies. It's been translated into, I think, 13 languages now. And it's just helped so many introverts across the globe. So it's been great to see. And I think the biggest thing that it's done is it's really created this movement, which is why I actually founded National Introverts Week in the United States. But the goal is it's not, poor you, you're an introvert. Let me show you how to survive in an extroverted world. It's forget that. You have a natural edge. Embrace that and realize that there are systems to allow you to succeed in all so-called extroverted arenas. And that's what it's really been great to see happen with this book and the sequel.
Well, I am thrilled, as are many other introverts, that you wrote this book. And speaking of writing books, right on the heels of your first book, you wrote a second one. And it's the second in the series of Introvert's Edge. And this one focuses on networking.
Absolutely. And, I think every author forgets how exhausting it is to write a book after a year. And I started to get so much great feedback, and everyone kept saying to me, Matt, there's this, we're now closing more deals. We've got, we're doing really well, but we just don't have enough leads, and we don't know how to get in front of the right people, and we don't know how to set ourselves up for success. Because I always talk about, if you start with sales, you've kind of already lost, because if you're seen as a commodity and you don't know your market, you don't have great stories, when you get to sales, it's always going to be harder. It's always going to feel more obtruse. So because of that, people kept saying we need more leads, we need people to perceive us differently. So I just knew that there needed to be a second book in the series on networking. But I didn't want to write that one either. It was only when this kid from Buffalo, New York, I found out this story. This guy, Craig Turner, out of Buffalo, New York, he reached out to me and he said, Matt, I left your book on sales on my coffee table. And my son, who's in his teens, he enjoys business books. And we're talking about a kid that wears a hoodie all the time, never, always looking at his shoes, not really communicating with anybody. He said he picked up this book on sales and he read it cover to cover, and he carried it around with him in school every day. And he said, I've discovered that if Matthew can systemize sales, I can systemize the process of making friends. And within months, the hoodie disappeared. He started having conversations with the popular kids. There's a girl in the picture. Everything changed. And I went, you know what? There are so many business owners that behave like that kid at a networking room all the time because they feel like they have to be there, but they don't really want to be there and they haven't prepared. I need to give them the system for preparing so that they can absolutely dominate in that room when they get there on their terms. And so I teamed up with the same ghostwriter and we worked together on creating the Introvert's Edge Networking, which Upjourney just listed it as the #1 networking book for introverts ever written. So it's already starting to create another movement, and it's starting to help a lot more people in a much broader audience of introverts, which is great.
That's great. Now, a lot of introverts grow up struggling with networking, and I got to believe a lot of people absolutely avoid it because they hate the thought of it.
I think it's because people, yes, absolutely, it's true. People hate networking. Even extroverts, a lot of them hate it, but it's because of the way that they see networking, right? So to me, most people see networking as one of two things. You walk into a networking room and you do what I call transactional networking. Peter, do you want to buy from me? No. What about you? What about you? What about you? What about you? And it's horrible. Like, we see people walk around the room doing that, and it makes me ill to see people behave that way. But a lot of people feel that they have to behave that way because they just lost a deal and they need to build some more clientele, or their business is dead, or they just lost a job and they need a new career. But that is a lot of times something that people are unwilling to do. So they behave in what I call aimless networking, which is where they have all these shallow conversations with people where somebody asks them what they do and they even kind of put it down, or they say, oh, my day job is, they don't make it sound anything amazing. And because of that, everyone ends up walking out with a bunch of business cards going, well, I've kind of got loose relationships with any of these people, but will I catch up with them again? Gosh, I barely have time to catch up with my own friends. No, I'm not. If they call me and ask me to work with them, I will. But of course, they never do. So usually it leads people to say, well, networking doesn't work. Well, the truth is it does work. You're just doing it wrong. And for a lot of professional speakers, because I know that, for me as a speaker, I see speakers do this all the time. You see, they're constantly giving people value and giving people advice. And it's like they open up the fire hose of information for the person that they're speaking to. And the person walks away almost overwhelmed with all the information. Oh, I'll just try that out and then I'll definitely hire you. Of course, they never apply it and they never hire you. And you assume it's because they don't want to pay you, or that they're fake and they didn't mean what they said. Well, no, you just did networking wrong. What I talk about in this book is what I call strategic networking. By the way, if you think about networking only just before you walk in the room, and it's only when the reminder comes up on your calendar that you've got to go to that networking event that you begrudgingly booked, and you drove there, thinking about turning around the whole time, you walk into the room, you see the first person you see that probably sells insurance, and then that's the only person you speak to because you're an introvert, of course networking is not going to work. But if you plan out which networking event you're going to go to, you can research who's going to be in the room before you already go, work out what you're going to say, because you should know your marketplace and have a planned presentation. By the time you go into a networking room, it should be, or it should feel like a series of pre-planned conversations. And at that point, introverts have a huge edge. And especially if we leverage the power of a structured conversational technique, all of a sudden we feel comfortable and we can leverage the strengths of our amazing empathy, our amazing ability to listen and truly be interested in people. And that gives us a major edge.
We have a mutual business associate, Dr. Ivan Meisner, the founder of BNI. And I heard him put it this way once, which I thought was great. He said, if you ask 100 people who are going to a networking event, who here would like to sell something tonight? 100 hands will go up. But if you ask who here wants to buy something tonight, no hands will go up. So if you're there to sell, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're there going just to try to sell, you're probably going to fail. And that's where a lot of people come away saying networking doesn't work. But if you go there to make relationships, that's an entirely different situation.
Oh, look, I totally agree. And I think that when you say something like that, though, to the average person, they're like, well, yeah, I'm there to make relationships, but that makes me feel phony, right? Because the end outcome is I want to sell to people. So let me help people kind of work through this, because for me, networking, when people go networking, what they believe they're in networking events to do is find prospects. So sure, they're trying to foster these relationships to one day eventually sell. By the way, if you're in a room and you explain what you do and somebody says, oh my gosh, Peter, I want that. The worst thing you can ever do is say, oh, great, let's talk through your product or service. People get called out all the time. Oh, Peter, I love that. Like, how would I work with you? And you start telling them, and next thing you know, you're interrupted by George or Sarah. And they're like, oh, George, I haven't seen you in a long time. And now you've been interrupted and that deal is dead. So even if you meet a prospect that says they want to buy, you should always respond with, oh, thank you. I'm so glad you feel that way. But Peter, I don't really know enough about you at this point. So what I would suggest we do is we set up a time where we can get to know each other a little bit more, and I can find out about your unique needs. And then I can figure out whether I'm the right fit for you. And, then we can talk about, what working with me would look like. We've all got these iPhones these days that have got calendars. Let's set it up. And you can easily handle that situation. However, These are the least important. And I know this is going to be kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people listening, but prospects are not the reason we go networking. Prospects, while, if you're desperate for a lead, which is, by the way, you shouldn't wait until then to go networking. But if you are desperate for a lead, sure, I know it feels like that's the reason we're going. I guess, to fill up our pipeline, we all think that's where we're going. But in truth, this keeps us stuck in this hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, setting ourselves apart and making the sale, and constantly going through those motions. Now, with the right message and the right understanding of how to communicate with that message, which we can speak about in a second, because in truth, that actually helps your speaking business as well, then a lot of times it won't feel like selling and you'll get better results with that group of people. But the truth is there are two other categories of people that you will always get better results with, and they're your ticket out of the hamster wheel. My whole book focuses on, and I know my whole book talks about networking, right? But the key for this is actually to master the rooms so you never have to go back to one. Because you talked about our personal friend, Ivan Meisner, right? Ivan introduced me to a ton of people. Now, Ivan didn't know who I was 6 years ago, but now he's one of my strongest supporters. Why? Because I didn't see him as a prospect. And Ivan talks about how many people reach out to him and try and sell him straight off the bat. It's horrific considering he tells people that that is exactly what you shouldn't do. And most people in networking talk about that is what you shouldn't do, but people don't understand the other categories of people. And I talk about these people all the time. They are momentum partners and champions. A momentum partner, if you meet somebody that believes in what you do and you believe in what they do, well, then you guys can introduce each other to people. One of my best momentum partners is a lady called Judy Robinette. Her and I believe in what each other are doing. And every time I'm on a podcast, I recommend her. Every time she's on a podcast, she recommends me. I've been on like 35 podcasts because of her introductions. And I can talk to the six figures of how much revenue I've made through either her direct introductions or the podcast because of her introductions, right? Now, all of that comes from having a strong momentum partner, of me introducing her, her introducing me, not because we signed an official agreement that we were going to look after each other, but because we genuinely care and believe in each other's work. Now, that doesn't mean you say, oh, Peter, I really think you're a great guy. I'm going to introduce you to podcasts and I'd love you to do the same for me. You just say, I really think this person would be a great fit for your, you'd be a great fit for their podcast, or I really think this introduction would really help you. And if they do the same, great. Now you've got a momentum partner. If they don't, they've identified themselves as a taker, and then you never help them again. What does it cost you? An introduction or two? And if it was a genuine fit, you haven't hurt anyone, you've bettered the world, move on with your life. Champions are the key to getting seen as highly credible. It's the reason why now I'm listed as the number 3 global guru in the world of sales, is because of my champion relationships that endorse my work all over the globe. People like Ivan are one of my champions. These are the people that share your work because they genuinely believe in what you do, but they come with a huge amount of credibility and a huge audience. Now, what is it that we can really do for these people? Like for Ivan, he just loves hearing the fact that literally I am where I am today because BNI was able to pay my school fees. He loves the fact that I'm willing to share that on podcasts like this continuously, because he doesn't need to go on as many podcasts if I'm the one talking about how wonderful BNI was for my mother. On top of that, he and I have a true friendship. And because of that, he wants to support. I've never asked him for anything. He offers all the time. And other champions just like him do the same. Yet the problem is champions are tired. And it's funny, when I posted, our first image together of Ivan and I had somebody from my mother's old BNI network that was a branding specialist and said, oh, BNI needs new branding. Can you ask Ivan if he wants to hire me? And I'm like, are you serious? That's the way that you think that you connect with people? Everyone thinks in this prospect mindset. The key to success is identifying momentum partners and champions, giving them white glove treatment. And next thing you know, you won't even need to go to networking rooms.
That's great advice. Speaking about BNI, I totally agree. I was involved with it for 17 years, and I have nothing but great things to say about it. Hey, you're regarded as a top speaker. And many people are shocked when they realize that a large percentage of truly excellent speakers are, in fact, introverts. Why do you think that's so often the case?
Well, I think it's because there's all these reports that say that people fear public speaking more than death. And I feel like that anyone that actually says that probably hasn't been presented with death as an option. But in truth, people find, if you were to think about the most extroverted arenas, you'd say sales and networking. And people go, oh, I have to do that to make my business successful. And then public speaking, well, no one has to do that, right? Well, no, you don't have to. But gosh, it's an amazing revenue generator. It's an amazing way to leverage your business and your business's message. And gosh, it's a wonderful way to help people. If I didn't speak from stage, there would be hundreds of thousands of people across the world that missed out on hearing my message. And I believe that it's an important message to share. Now, if you don't believe your message is important enough to share, go in search of a better message and really come back to say, what am I truly passionate about? What mission am I on? After that, you need to be on stage to share that. Now, I think the reason why most people think that introverts can't make great speakers, or if they're introvert, they can't be a great speaker, is because, I face it, even I do it. I look at people that are successful on stage and I go, oh, it's easy for you. You're an extrovert. And the problem is that I assume that. There's a guy, Dan Walschmidt, who I talk about frequently. And I remember he spoke on stage at the the Sales 3.0 conference run by Selling Power. I was the closing keynote. And I remember seeing Dan before me and I went, oh my gosh, I wish I had the ability to be as dynamic as he from stage. I've always been, my passion, my mission allows me to speak in this engaging way that I hope that people are hearing that I'm speaking at right now. And I do have a lot of energy, but gosh, he was mind-blowing in the way he commanded that stage. And I just went, oh, he's an extrovert. Clearly, I can't do that. Well, no, Dan is an introvert. I found out later. People like Zig Ziglar. He's one of the most engaging people you've ever seen from stage. What kills me? Bill Murray, the funny guy from Groundhog Day and Ghostbusters, he is an introvert. Like Leonardo DiCaprio is an introvert. Oprah Winfrey is an introvert. Why is it that we think that we can't? The truth is because we believe that there's this gift of gab wall that we can't cross. It's a complete falsity. But we believe it so emphatically that we don't try to pass it. In truth, introverts need systems. We can't do it in an organic way. But when we have a system and a process for succeeding, which is what I've provided in networking and in sales, and Peter, what you provide when it comes to public speaking, all of a sudden, we can follow a step-by-step process, and a process will always outperform a dynamic experience. Because in truth, you ask somebody that's an extrovert to recreate exactly what they did on stage that worked so well, but just improve these two elements. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't even remember what I did. I flew by the seat of my pants. You ask me, and I'm like, oh yeah, exactly that point. Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. Which is why in 7 years, I went from terrified to speak, bouncing off the sides of the stage like a Dodgem car, to being listed by, a bunch of places. Top Sales World magazine lists me as one of the top 50 speakers in the world. Big Speak lists me as one of the top sales trainers on the planet, all because I focused on system and practice and preparation over just winging it. Because gosh, if I had to wing it, I probably would have been, kneeling down in the corner hoping no one sees me. That is not the success factor that I would suggest that most introverts follow.
So what's that first action step that someone who is introverted can take to become a more effective speaker?
I think that the most speakers, well, we were talking about this in networking, right? They get up on stage, and the first thing is most introverts feel that they've got to explain why they deserve to be there. So they get up and they start talking about their personal story. 15 minutes in, everyone in the audience has heard I about 45 times, and they're over you. Now, the reason we do that is because we think we have to talk about ourselves, which introverts don't even like doing, by the way. Now, sure, there's a place for that, but you do it. Like for me, I do it. I talk about differentiation, niche marketing. And then before I talk about sales, everyone's looking at me like I'm a superhero. And I'm like, no, let's bring me down a peg. I put up a photo of me with really bad acne, and I help people realize that if I can do it, they can do it too, which makes my story about them, which means as an introvert, I feel more comfortable. The next thing is I use stories. I talk about stories in sales. I talk about stories in networking, and I tell stories from stage. Firstly, this really cool thing for speakers is and I should tell you this, like I tell meeting organizers all the time. And, it was actually a lot more scary for them before I won all these speaking awards, because at least now they can go, no, he's clearly good. It says it here. He's not going to run away. But I always will tell a meeting organizer beforehand, I'll say, Peter, look, just so you know, don't think I've disappeared, but for about 15 minutes before the presentation, for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be turning off this microphone. I'm going to be walking away, and then I'll show back up, because I don't want people to think I fled the building. But I am literally pacing because I am anxious. Now, here's the thing. As soon as I get on stage, I say, thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. How will I live up to such a great introduction? I know, let me tell you about Wendy. And I practice, all I'm doing is practicing that line over and over again. And then I start telling the story of Wendy. Now, here's the thing. When you tell a story, it activates the reticular activating system of our brain. It creates artificial rapport, which means all of a sudden I feel at ease and everybody in the audience feels at ease. And naturally I can relax. Literally, as soon as I start that story, I feel the pressure disappear. And you try and get me off the stage at that point, right? So story is hugely powerful. Also, it short circuits the logical mind. You speak directly to the emotional mind. Now, the logical mind is the part of the brain going, that'll work for me, that won't work for me, I haven't got time for this. Is this guy still speaking? It short circuits that part of the brain. You speak to the emotional part of the brain, which literally is story time, and it listens. Now, if you're thinking about whether people will really listen to you drone on and on about stories, think about the last documentary you watched and how long you spent watching it before you got bored compared to the 3-hour thriller that you probably just watched, at the cinema. Well, probably not in the cinema with COVID right now, but on Netflix or whatever. And how long you spent watching that before you got bored. People absorb stories. And more importantly, they remember 22 times, up to 22 times more information when embedded into a story. So first thing, if you're going to open up your fire hose of information, if you embed it into stories, they'll actually remember it. I remember the first time I spoke from stage and I wanted to teach people everything I knew about marketing. So I did. For 45 minutes, I blew them away with details and frameworks and systems and statistics, and no one applied a thing. The goal of a speaker is to motivate and inspire people to take action. Now, of course, if you're smart, don't sell from stage, but you should also embed yourself as the only logical choice at which to do it, which stories are great for doing. However, when I tell a story, I don't tell them as much jargon because I can't fit it all into the story because it didn't apply to them. Secondly, I focus on 3 messages, 1 message per story to keep it super simple. Now, when I get up and I tell 3 stories, and then a 4th story, obviously, between 2 and 3, I tell my personal story to bring myself down to their level. All of a sudden, I find everyone engaged. And as soon as I stopped with the fire hose, I stopped being a trainer and started being a keynote speaker or a workshop leader. As soon as I did that, all of a sudden, people actually applied the content that I was suggesting. And more importantly, I felt like I had a relationship with everyone in the room. The testimonials I kept getting was, even on virtual now, people give testimonials. I felt like he was speaking directly to me. And that is because of the way, obviously I've rehearsed these stories, I've practiced these stories, but I tell them in such an engaging way because I've practiced them. But also stories feel that way, even if I wasn't that talented. So by using stories, speaking from stage, it is a superpower for introverts. And better than that, we can practice them over and over again. And all we've got to be thinking about before we go on stage is, oh, I'm speaking to a bunch of speakers today. Oh, I'm speaking to a bunch of tradespeople today. Oh, I'm speaking to a bunch of attorneys today. How do I tailor this specific story and anchor it to their unique situations? And better than that, at the end, you say, so what can we learn from this? The first one for me is, speaking to everyone is speaking to no one, right? You've got to find the unmet need in the marketplace. And then I start talking about attorneys and examples. Literally, I've got to figure out 2 or 3 minutes worth of customization around the whole story. And all of a sudden, I'm hammering home that moral. And people are like, this person's really, really researched our organization and spent so much time customizing their speech. It doesn't take me a lot of time, but stories allow me to give them the understanding. And the moral at the end is customized per individual. So stories by far are the most powerful speaking tool I've ever seen.
When you talk about customizing it for the individual, years ago, I made the mistake of not doing that.
It's interesting. So a lot of times I'll use the same 3 stories because I like to use outside the industry specific stories so people don't take offense. See, the wonderful thing about stories, if I say you need to be doing this, need to be doing this, need to be doing this, they're like, well, I'm doing that. And I don't think that'll work for me. If I tell a story of someone outside their industry, all they're hearing is the ideology, right? The great thing about stories is people assume all the detail as fact and they just listen for the moral. So when I'm tailoring it at the end and I'm delivering the moral, I make that unique to the industry. Now, if you don't there's a bunch of speakers that go, oh, I didn't get a chance to read the brief. Do you know what the organization is before you get on stage? That is not me. What I will do, and actually I have my book here, but when I will go and do a speaking event, there is not a time that I will not do a half an hour to an hour phone call with the senior leadership before I do a keynote, because I want to understand what's going on. I want to understand the people. I want to understand everything that's going on, because in truth, I customize every one of my presentations, but I do it through the lens of those three stories so that people understand the ideology, which again, doesn't require, I mean, you shouldn't have to, I don't believe you should have to change around all your slides. There's a couple of slides that I change based on the unique needs of the business. But for me, what I generally find is that I can speak to their unique problems and their unique situations. As an introvert, by the way, after we have that 1 hour conversation, any introvert is going to obsess over that conversation about what they said right, what they said wrong. And that's a superpower. Because for me, I remember people are blown away, but I will use the exact words that they used in the meeting because I've replayed them in my head 100 times. And when I get up on stage, I'm like, this is that unique problem. This is how that applies to that unique problem. It is my secret to success. Strategy, planning. People are like, do you script your presentation? No, I don't. I do practice my stories over and over again. And then I think about what I'm going to say in some of the remarks I make. I remind myself about the certain situations and the issues they have, and I link back to those. And I mean, if you don't really know your content, I mean, there's this saying, I think it was Richard Branson, that said, any idiot can make something sound complicated. It takes an expert to make it sound simple. And for me, my stories are simple. And then if I don't truly understand their business, their model, and their challenges, then I can't tailor it in a simple way. So that's why if I'm half an hour into a call and I don't feel like I understand enough, I'm like, let's sit down a little bit more. I need to understand. I need to go deeper. By the time we get to the end of the hour, I understand their situations a lot of times better than they do, because I know all of what they think, plus everything I already knew. And because of that, when I deliver the keynote, by the end of it, they're like, oh my gosh, can I hire you to do training with my team? Can we hire you to mentor our organization through this or through that? It changes the dynamic. But here's the one thing that I will say for all speakers is, and we were talking about this just offline, Peter. One of the things I see speakers do, though, is they put themselves in categories. And that is the stupidest thing you can ever do as a speaker. Like, yes, in theory, I am a sales trainer. Yes, in theory, I'm a marketing specialist. Yes, in theory, I'm a master in neuro-linguistic programming. I mean, in truth, I'm too many things, and nobody cares. Nobody cares how hard it was for me to learn these things, how long I spent learning these things. But when I call myself the rapid growth guy, people are like, what is that? And this is the key. If you fit in a box, there's always someone that's willing to do it cheaper than you. And people already go into trainings and meetings with preconceived ideas about how boring it's going to be or how overwhelming it's going to be. I mean, if you're an accountant and you call yourself an accountant, you go from stage and you talk about finance, people already know it's going to be boring before they get there, which means even if you learn to tell amazing stories, they've come in with this wrong mindset. So you don't want, and I know a lot of speakers are like, oh, you know, I need to fit on e-speakers under the specific categories. In truth, yeah, you can fit into categories there, but most of your business isn't going to come from that, especially when you're getting started. You know, I get booked by a ton of bureaus and people are, oh yeah, I'm just going to, you know, I'll get all these bureaus to book me. The truth is the bureaus book people that are already getting booked themselves, and they want that special person that stands out from the crowd. And, you know, for me, now I get all these bureaus trying to book me because organizations know about me. But you've got to start by being different. It's about going against the curve. It's not being seen as a commodity and fitting in the box. That's the key to getting employed, a lot of people think, but it is not the key to getting your prices up and people not seeing you as a commodity and not negotiating you and seeing you as the only logical choice.
Being a commodity is a race to the bottom.
Isn't it though? Actually, if we've got time, I've got a really good example of this.
Sure.
I actually worked with a language tutor out of California. And I mean, she taught kids and adults Mandarin. I mean, she wasn't a professional speaker by any means, but you know, when she came to me, she's like, Matt, I used to charge $50 to $80 an hour successfully, but there's all these people moving into California that are willing to teach Mandarin for $30 to $40 an hour. So she's competing against cheaper. She said, worse than that, there's all these people in China now, thanks to the global economy we're now part of, offering to do it for $12 an hour on Craigslist. Worse than that, thanks to our friends in Silicon Valley, there's actually, you know, technology now. I'll teach you English, you teach me Mandarin, we just won't charge anyone anything. So she's competing against free. So she's like, well, how do I compete in this crowded marketplace? Can you teach me some sales strategies to help? As I said earlier, you know, that's a fight to the bottom, because in truth, they're always going to find out eventually they can get that cheaper. I said, what we've got to learn to do is sidestep the battle altogether. So I started to look at all the clients that she'd worked with. And I mean, she'd worked with hundreds over the years. But what I discovered is there were two people, and it was really only two. These were executives being relocated across to China. And she helped them with much more than just language education. For those people that have been to China, you'll understand that their version of rapport is very different. Like if I was trying to sell you something in the Western world and I was incredibly bad at sales, at the end, I might say something horrible like, so do you want to move forward? And you would say, yes, no, or everyone's favorite. Let me think about it, right? Well, at the end of that conversation, I might call you back a week later and say, so have you thought about it? And if you still say, no, I need some more time, I know my chances of getting that sale are going down and down. Well, in China, they're going to want to see you maybe 5 or 6 times before they even discuss business. They're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice. It's just the kind of people that they are. And she helped them understand that. She helped them understand the difference between e-commerce in China and the Western world and the importance of respect. Like learning the language isn't enough. You've got to reduce your accent, how to hold a business card. Why are these things so important? Because they're not talking about 12 or 24-month deals. They're talking about 50 to 100-year contracts. The relationship is so much more important. I said, Wendy, stop. You're doing so much more for these people than just language tuition. I said, you're stuck in your functional skills. She said, yeah, I mean, I understand that, but, I'm just trying to help. I said, yes, but is it fair to assume as a result of this assistance that you're doing for these people, they're going to be more successful in China? She's like, I mean, yeah, that's the point, right? I said, great. Why don't we call you the China Success Coach then? Forget about teaching Mandarin. Let's create a China Success Intensive, which worked with the executive, the spouse, and any children to help them be relocated, to be successful when they get relocated to China. Now, she loved the idea of this. She's like, but who do I sell it to? I said, well, who do you think your ideal client is? And she said, well, obviously it's the executive. I said, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I was terrified moving from Australia to the United States and they speak the same language here. I understand it, but it's not your ideal client. She said, well, obviously the company would pay. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, a lot of times they have millions of dollars riding on the executive being successful. I said, I still don't think it's your right client though. Frustrated. She's like, well, who then? I said, your ideal client's the immigration attorney. She looked at me like I was speaking a different language. And I was like, think about it for a second. These people make $5,000 to $7,000 for doing a visa for anyone going to China. For that, they've got to get the client, which isn't cheap. They've got to deal with all the bureaucracy and the paperwork. They've got to have an office. They've got staff to pay for. They'd be lucky to make $3,000 for a simple introduction. I said, so they'd be lucky to make $3,000 from doing that. I said, so offer them $3,000 for the introduction to them afterwards. They love the idea. Now, think about this for a second. She's now not going to networking events where executives are or where their organizations go. She's going to networking events where the immigration attorneys are. And she's introducing herself and people are like, $3,000, double my profit for a simple introduction? Sure, what would I have to say? And she just says, all you got to do is say, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to be relocated when you get to China. And they'd be, overconfident executives. They'd be like, yeah, I think we're set. We've got our place sorted now. Thank you. We learned the language. We're getting we've got our visas. I think we're good to go. And they just respond with, there's a lot more to it than that. I think you need to speak to the China Success Coach. Wendy would then get on the phone with the easiest sales in the world. These were terrified to go people, organizations motivated to pay, recommended by their attorney. She charged $30,000 for this program. It was only 5 weeks. Minus the $3,000 commission, she made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world. That is the power of having a strong and differentiated message and knowing your niche and having an understanding of who that is. For instance, yes, I speak at a lot of corporates. I get corporates from all over the world. I was one of the 10 featured speakers at Microsoft Inspire that they had out over 600 speakers at their event. Oracle, invited me to do their roadshow. They only invite one. I think they've only invited one external speaker for like the last 5 years. I was that speaker. Intel's invited me to speak at their event, but they're inviting me. That is not my niche. I know that my niche is a small business association. It is an organization like EO. Those kind of groups are the ones that I love to speak with. So my external marketing goes towards that. Everything I do is about helping an introverted service provider business owner. And to them, I am their rapid growth guy. To everyone else, yes, that doesn't mean I don't have to, I can't work with them. It means that I have to choose, and it better pay really well because I don't enjoy it as much, because helping introverted service providers is what sets me alight. Now, let's look at that as a speaker. As a speaker, I'm not a sales trainer. I'm not a marketing coach. I'm not a master in NLP. I am the rapid growth guy, which means I live in a category of one. I have no competition. I have a client of mine that is in the motivational space, and he calls himself the Energizer. The Energizer has no competition. You've got to ask yourself, what is the higher level benefit of what you do? It's this easy. You say, what are the things I do outside the scope of my functional skill? And then what is the higher level benefit of that? For Wendy, it was respect, rapport, and e-commerce. The high level benefit was China success. For me, it's that I bring sales and networking and marketing all together. I'm the rapid growth guy. And for my motivational speaker, he was the Energizer. You've got to ask yourself, what are the things I do outside the scope of my functional skill? And then what is the higher level benefit of that? That is your key to being not seen as a commodity anymore, but to be seen as a marketplace of one. And as soon as you know your message, your niche, all of a sudden you can say, well, what are the three major problems that my niche has? Well, what's a story that I can tell about a person that had that problem, that I got to an outcome and they had a really positive result? And what's the moral of that I can deliver? For instance, the Wendy story is that you need to differentiate, that you need to stop being seen as a commodity. You need to look at the stories that will do the same for you. Motivate and inspire customers to take action while embedding you as the only logical choice. So to do that, all you need is messaging, know your niche, know the three problems, and then deliver your three stories. And you will make so much more money as a speaker if you have these elements in your business.
That's a fantastic piece of advice. And I love how you illustrated it with the story about Wendy. What final piece of encouragement do you have for our audience who happen to be introverted?
Obviously this market is, or the people listening to this, people that want to be professional speakers. So I'm going to be very specific about the advice, is that firstly, you have to start treating your speaking business like a business. Right? It's not, hey, I've got some great ideas that I want to share and I really think will add great value. You have to be strategic, especially as an introvert. If you don't have a plan, good luck. I mean, I know that everyone talks about how speakers make so much money. And in truth, I make an amazing income as a speaker. It's only one portion of my income. I make amazing money doing other things as well. But there are people that make, I think the average income in the speaking world is like $27,000 a year. And in truth, it's bumped up by a lot of extroverts because guess what? Introverts are probably at the bottom of that because they don't do planning, they don't do preparation. So strategy before action. Everybody does what I call busy procrastination. They keep doing things, looking for tactics. They don't stop and think. And in our today world, we kind of live in this, we have to be acting all the time. If I can get people to stand still for 2 days and get their strategy right, they will fly forward. Yet most people are unwilling to do that. So what I would suggest to everybody is just stop for 2 days, put the iPhone down, stop responding. If you're a cold caller, wait, because your message is going to be better. Get your message right. Understand your niche. So you're calling the right people. So you're advertising the right things. So you're posting. I mean, the amount of people that should be sales trainers that are posting about motivation, the motivational people that are posting on social media about continuous improvement. If you know your strategy, you stop succumbing to shiny object syndrome, and your message always hammers home. Your consistency gets people to remember you in this crowded market. The rule I have is if you can't be the clearest, you have to be the loudest. As an introvert, you don't want to be the loudest, so be the clearest. And what I would suggest, actually, for all those people that are listening, you don't need to hire me to help you get that message and discover your niche. There's actually an exercise that I give out for free where it's a 5-step template where you can create your own unified message and discover your niche. I did it at the National Freelance Conference. Literally nearly 200 people in the room. And at the end, I said, put up your hand if you now have a unified message that you believe will excite and inspire people to want to know more about you. And you've identified a niche you're willing to buy clients. And like 97% of the room put their hands up. Yet that sounds great until I tell you when I said, great, now keep your hands up if this is the most time you spent on marketing since you started your business, 85% out of the room kept their hands up. So the key is that this works if you spend time doing it. So what I would suggest to everybody is go to matthewpollard.com/growth. There, you will be able to download a template which will show you how to create that message and discover your niche. Now, I would recommend that you find a friend to listen to this podcast as well so they understand why they're doing it. And again, not a professional speaker, or at least not a speaker from your industry, so you don't fall into that jargon speak. Spend an hour on them and then get them to spend an hour on you, and your life will be massively different because you did that. The big thing for me is if I can get people to get their strategy right, all of a sudden, if you've got the right message, you know your niche, you've got stories, you've got packaging and pricing that stimulate purchasing behavior in your niche because you built it for them, all of a sudden networking is not so hard. All of a sudden sales isn't that hard. I mean, when I go to networking events, I don't say I'm a sales trainer because then they'll look at me like I'm one step above a scam artist. When I don't say I'm a marketer, I need marketing. How much do you cost? Well, now I'm talking about price. I just met you. It's awkward. I say I'm the rapid growth guy, and people go, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that before. What exactly is that? Now I have their permission to explain, especially if I follow the right networking system and I start by being interested in them and asking questions and giving them value. Then they're like, oh my gosh, Peter, I can't believe I've been talking for 20 minutes. I haven't even asked you what you do. And you say, oh, I'm the rapid growth guy. And then all of a sudden you get to explain because they asked, because they feel that you gave great value and were so interested in them. It's a supercharger of system and planning that allows you to be amazing in the networking room, amazing at speaking, and amazing at sales. But planning is key for every introvert listening. So if you're just winging it, give up, because that is not your key to success.
How many other things in our business lives do we wing?
You're 100% right. I mean, you think about it, everybody, a lot of people talk about, if you read a book like E-Myth, they're like systems, process. Everyone wants to have standard operating procedures in large businesses. Everything is process. But when you think about sales, networking, and public speaking, they're like, oh, that's gift of gab terrain, right? You can't plan that. Well, that is not true. And I have proven it time and time again that is not true. So do not wing it. Make sure you've got a strategy and a plan. So do the template at matthewpollard.com/growth. And then my publisher hates me when I say this. You don't need to buy my books. If you go to the introvertsedge.com, you'll be able to download the first chapter of my sales book. And there, literally, it will outline the first 7 steps to a sale. It'll get you over thinking that you can sell as an introvert first. And then it will outline the 7 steps. If you do nothing more than grab what you already say and put it under those 7 steps, you'll realize there's a bunch of things you say that you shouldn't be saying to clients. Throw that out. You shouldn't be saying it. Then you'll realize there's some things out of order. Fix that. And then you'll realize there's some gaping holes, like asking great questions and telling great stories, because you've opened up the fire hose of jargon, but not actually told great stories. And not the story of, customer wanted this, so we gave it to them. I mean, more like stories of how you met your wife or husband, right? Ones that you've practiced and planned that have emotional depth to them that keep people engaged. Otherwise, you may as well just be giving factual information. So you can download that chapter at theintrovertsedge.com. And my networking book, you can do the same thing at theintrovertsedge.com/networking. Again, I'll help you believe that you can be masterful at networking as an introvert. And then I'll outline the process that you can work towards, even within the first chapter, to master the room yourself.
In the show notes are the links to each of the sites that Matthew suggested you go to. I highly recommend that you do. And Matthew, I want to thank you for being here. It's been an absolute thrill to have you here, and I wish you all the best.
Mate, it was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites. Public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.